Hi everyone, in this video I will show you different kinds of shaders made by Unreal Engine 4 and change different parameters to check what these could influence the final effect. So I will introduce 6 kinds of parameters including opacity, ambient, Fresnel, specular effects, random effects, and animation one by one. And finally I'm gonna explain some subparts of the raindrop shader and to show you how to apply this shader to the material that I wanna use. So let's get started. First, I'm going to introduce the opacity part. You can see that here it's a glass cover to protect my tree, and this scene is in a dream, so everything is reasonable. So let's first check the blueprint of the glass cover. You can see that its specular roughness and opacity are all linked. If we change the opacity to 1, you can see that it's totally not opaque. And if we change it to 0, it's totally opaque that you even cannot notice it. So 0.5 is a reasonable value to make it like a glass, but the other thing that can control the opacity is the roughness. Right now the roughness is 0 and it's totally smooth. And if we change it to 1, you can see that it's like a frosted glass. So I'm gonna change it back to 0 to have a better effect. So that's all about opacity. Next part, I want to introduce the ambient occlusion. Part is about the ambient occlusion. For this example, it means this tree, the inside part is darker than the outside part because of the ambient occlusion, because the inside part is harder for light to shine. To make it more obvious, I open the buffer visualization and specular mode so that we can see it directly. Here is my shader. You see that I use a vector to decide which part is darker and which part is brighter. I subtract the absolute world position with the object position to get a vector length. And if the vector length is 5 meters from the center to the edge, then the color will become from darker to lighter. And with all these things, I connect it with the ambient occlusion. And this power node can control the intensity of the ambient occlusion. Right now, it's a suitable value about 3. If we change it to 10, then apply to it, you can see that all these areas are darker instead of light gray. Come back to the lit mode. This may seem a little bit strange, because we don't have so much leaves here, so the inside part shouldn't be so dark. Let's change it back to 3. Then apply to it. Okay, much better. There are some difference between it. You can see the edge, it's really bright, and the inside, it's darker. I think this power is enough. Okay, so that's all about ambient occlusion part, and next part we'll talk about Fresnel. Here is a node named Fresnel. Fresnel can return to a value between 0 and 1 based on pixel normal of the object the camera is viewing relative to the camera's angle. So first, I disconnect every line that Fresnel connects to the final effect. You can see that here just a pure color, light pink, and because I multiply it by 25 and link it to the emissive color that can control which part of my material can appear to glow, so it's like a light pink ball. And if I connect Fresnel to this node, you can see that only the outline of the material will light. And what's more, I want something fun, that I want to control its opacity here. So first I'm gonna disconnect this and just link it here. You can see this is like a pink bubble, but I just want something fantasy, more drama, and I use a rotate texture here to use a rotator and S-curve, and this can control the power. I think power 2 is just fine. Link the result with the multiple. Okay, now you can see it's just like magic. And I apply this to assets. Okay, so this is the final effect of my material, and you can see that this can help the player to decide where to go. And that's all for now. Next, we want to talk about the specular effect. Next part is about the specular effect. let's come back to the glass cover. You can see here it's a parameter named Specular and a node named Specular. To have a more obvious view about this effect, I'm gonna change the opacity to 1, the roughness to 0.5. Now the material looks like a little bit metal. And right now the specular is 1, and if we change its value to 0, you can see that there's totally no specular, like a black hole. Let's change it back to 1. Right now, here are some light around it, little bit reflection. If we change the roughness to 1, then no matter how much I change my specular value, there will be nearly no difference, only some color lighter or darker, but no specular effect. Okay, so let's change it back, and you can see that even though the roughness is 0, I changed the specular to 0, the material become back to something that with no reflection. It's like absorb every light into it. So somehow I can see that these two nodes can control each other. But if we combine them correctly, like to change the specular to 1, roughness to 0 and opacity to 0.5, then it's a great glass effect here. That's all about specular effect. Next part we're gonna talk about random effect. Here we have the noise texture. The different color channel, it has different pattern. Here's the blue channel, the green channel, and the red channel. So let's go back to this place. We basically use the green channel as the base channel for this texture, that I'm gonna create some little puddles on the ground with the wind and ripples here, but I'm not gonna introduce too much detail for this. To make it more obvious, we will connect this to the base color, and we can see that all the puddles are in the dark area, and we can change the different value to see how these nodes can affect the final effect. First, I'm gonna change this one. This is about the absolute world position, and if we change the 0.01 to make it more obvious, if we change it to 0.1, okay. And if we can change back to 0.0001. Okay, this is make it too big and there is no dark area, a random place that I choose. So maybe 0.01 it's the best. Okay, so that you can see the size of the puddle is quite good. Next node, I'm gonna change the value of here. And the original one is 0.25, and if we change it to 0.5, 2 times. Okay, if we change it to 10, okay, there is something different. So these two values can control the scale of the pattern we choose. And finally, our petals will appear to the place that is dark. In fact, I put all this kind of stuff into a function, and we can apply this function to any different shaders that we want. For example, this oak wood, we can make it as a floor, and if we apply this weather puddles function to this, you can see the surface, it's really similar to the reality. Here's some puddles and some reflections and some ripples. It's like the floor in the rainy day. Okay, so this is basically the random effect part. Next part, we're gonna tell you about the animation. Finally comes to the animation part. Let's look at this ground surface. It's easy to tell that this weather is rainy because the surface is darker and have reflection, but apparently the ripples on it is the most important part. Okay, so let's first check the single ripple shader. For this shader, the most important particularities is the loop. This part can help us to make a loop. The frag node, they return to the decimal part of the value, so with time goes by, it will always end as a value between 0 and 1. The clamp node would clamp the value between 0 and 5, so you can see that each time the ripple being created and fade out, there would be 5 concentric circles, like that. If we change it to 1, there would become only 1 ripple, And if we change it to 10, wow, this is far from reality, so 5 is a suitable value. And the pi node and the sine node can help us to make a sine wave, which value is between -1 and 1. Okay, except the loop, fading out is also quite critical to this shader effect. If we link the sine node and the multiply node directly, you can see that when the loop ended, the ripple disappeared immediately. But if we add this 1- node, it will help to change the value range between 0 to 1 to 1 to 0, so at this time, our ripple would fade on the edge. Next step, I will change the texture sample to a texture with multiple circles. Now this effect is pretty good. We have a bunch of ripples right now. And if we disconnected these two nodes, we can see all the ripples would be simultaneously. But in the real life, not all rain will drop together on the ground, so we could let them happen at different times through the alpha value. For this texture, the alpha value is different for each small part. So if we connect the alpha value with time, these ripples wouldn't show at the same time. Finally, ripples in reality would overlap with each other. To achieve this effect, we need to compile what we did before to a function and call this function node several times. So this is the single function here. And I'll just skip the function creation part and goes to this part directly. In this function, I call the function 4 times, with different time value, different UV value, and different weight value. And this is the final effect. So you can see that we use the weather ripples function here, and this is the final effect. We can apply this effect to any material we want, like this. Just connect everything it needs, the UVs and intensity, and return the result to normal. So the reason why it's not so obvious through this, because I have really a large plane to fill, so I use this node to make it a multiple like 30 times, so it's really hard to see, but yeah, here are some ripples, and I just apply this to this plane, and you can see, yes, the effect is pretty good. Last, let's check a raindrop shader here, and I'm gonna briefly introduce every part of it. So first, the normal coordinate. This can impact the UV coordinates of this texture, and put together the red channel and green channel together. And for the third vector, I just plug in a constant 1 and link to the normal. As you can see the final effect, here are some static drop and some animated drop. So this part is for the animated raindrop, and this part is for the static raindrop. So the way we decided which part to be static and which part to be animated, you can check the texture here. Here's the alpha channel of the texture, and we want the black one, the little one, to be static, and the white one, the bigger one, to be animated. Last is the direction mask. We only want these raindrops happened on the top of the surface. So you can see like that. All these rains will happen on the top, and behind the surface there will be nothing. And this is reasonable in the reality. How can we use this? I didn't make a function of it because it's a little bit simple, so I just copy all these blueprints and paste it right here. This is my bush shader, and I just add this normal part with the raindrop normal part together and link it to normal. And you can see that here are some rains on the leaf. And when I apply the final shader to the material of my map, you can see that there are really some raindrops and no raindrops behind the surface. Okay, so in this video, we talked about several parameters about shaders in Unreal Engine 4. Hope this will help you understand shaders better. See you next video.